There is a moment that separates companies that survive from companies that become history. It doesn't happen when sales collapse. It doesn't happen when competitors appear. It happens much earlier. It begins the day success becomes comfortable. Imagine building a business that millions of people love. Revenue is growing. Customers are loyal. Investors are confident. Every report says you're winning. Then, instead of protecting that success, you begin tearing it apart. Not because it has failed, because one day, it will. Most executives spend their careers defending what already works. Very few are willing to destroy it with their own hands. Yet one company made exactly that choice. A decision that looked reckless, confused Wall Street, angered customers, and nearly became one of the biggest strategic disasters in modern business. But hidden beneath that chaos was a principle powerful enough to transform an online DVD company into one of the most influential entertainment businesses in history. This isn't the story of Netflix defeating Blockbuster. You've heard that story before. This is the story of why Netflix refused to become the next Blockbuster. Because sometimes, the greatest threat to an empire isn't the competition outside, it's the success inside. By the late 2000s, Netflix looked like one of Silicon Valley's smartest success stories. What began in 1997 as a small DVD rental startup had grown into a subscription business that solved one of America's biggest frustrations. No late fees, no rushing back to the video store, no wondering whether the movie you wanted was already gone. Instead, DVDs arrived in your mailbox. Watch them when you wanted. Send them back when you were finished. Simple, convenient, predictable. Customers loved it. The subscription model generated recurring revenue. Membership continued to grow. Investors rewarded the company. From almost every traditional business measure, Netflix had already found its winning formula. And that's exactly what made the next decision so difficult. Because history teaches us something uncomfortable. The most dangerous moment for any successful company is rarely when everything is going wrong. It's when everything appears to be going right. Success creates confidence. Confidence becomes routine. Routine slowly becomes complacency. And complacency quietly blinds companies to the future forming around them. Most businesses don't disappear because they fail to build something valuable. They disappear because they become experts at protecting yesterday's success. Netflix was approaching that same crossroads. But unlike most companies, it was about to ask a question that almost no successful business ever wants to ask. What if our greatest success is also becoming our greatest weakness? History has a habit of disguising the future. It almost never arrives with fireworks. It whispers. It begins as an inconvenience, a strange new technology, an awkward idea, product that seems slower, more expensive, or less useful than the one people already love. Most businesses ignore these moments, not because they're foolish, because the future rarely looks impressive at first. At the beginning of the 2000s, DVDs still dominated home entertainment. Broadband internet existed, but millions of American households still depended on slower internet connections. Watching an entire movie online wasn't yet a normal experience. From a business perspective, DVDs still made perfect sense. Customers understood them. The economics worked. The infrastructure already existed. If you were running Netflix during those years, there was every reason to keep improving the business you had already mastered. And that is exactly what most successful companies would have done. Because success changes how leaders measure risk. They no longer ask, what opportunity might we miss? Instead they ask, what do we have to lose? That subtle shift has quietly destroyed some of history's greatest companies. Netflix refused to think that way. Inside the company, executives weren't simply looking at today's customers. They were watching technology itself. Internet speeds were improving. Compression technology was becoming more efficient. Cloud infrastructure was evolving. Computers were becoming more powerful. The question wasn't whether streaming was better than DVDs. It wasn't. Not yet. The real question was far more dangerous. What happens the day streaming finally becomes good enough? Because once that day arrived, mailboxes, distribution centers, delivery trucks, and millions of plastic discs would stop being competitive advantages. They would become expensive liabilities. That realization changed everything. Netflix wasn't predicting exactly when the future would arrive. No one could. They were recognizing something even more important. Technology almost never moves in a straight line. It moves slowly, until suddenly, it doesn't. Most companies prepare for the present. Exceptional companies prepare for inevitability. That distinction sounds small. History proves it isn't. So, in 2007, Netflix made a decision that confused much of the industry. While DVDs remained the company's strongest source of revenue, Netflix introduced a streaming feature. First, it was limited. The library was small. The viewing experience was inconsistent. From a purely financial perspective, it looked like an unnecessary distraction. Why invest heavily in a business that generated less revenue, while risking the one already paying the bills? Wall Street saw growing costs. Competitors saw an unfinished product. Many customers barely noticed. But Netflix wasn't building for 2007. It was building for a customer that barely existed yet. And in doing so, the company made one of the most uncomfortable decisions any successful business can make. It chose to compete with itself. There is a popular myth in business that great companies move confidently from one success to another. Reality is rarely that neat. The hardest decisions often look like mistakes while they're happening. Netflix was about to discover that firsthand. By introducing streaming, the company had created an unusual problem. For years, it now had to operate two different businesses at the same time. One business generated the cash. The other consumed it. The DVD subscription service was mature, profitable, and trusted. Streaming, by contrast, demanded enormous investment. Licensing digital content was expensive. The technology platform required constant development. Internet infrastructure varied widely across the country, and the streaming catalog was still far from complete. From the outside, it looked as though Netflix was making its own business more complicated than necessary. Then came 2011, a year that nearly changed everything. Management announced a plan to separate the DVD by-mail business from the streaming service. The DVD operation would become a new company called Quickster. Customers would manage two separate accounts, two separate websites, two separate bills. What looked logical inside the boardroom felt frustrating to customers. The backlash was immediate. Subscribers criticized the plan. Investors reacted sharply. The company's reputation suffered. Netflix quickly reversed the decision and abandoned Quickster. Looking back, many people remember this as proof that Netflix lost its way. But that interpretation misses something important. The failure wasn't that Netflix believed streaming was the future. The failure was how it tried to manage the transition. The underlying direction remained the same. The execution stumbled. That distinction matters, because history often treats strategic mistakes and strategic principles as if they are the same thing. They aren't. The principle was still correct. Digital distribution would eventually replace physical media. The company simply underestimated how people experience change. Customers rarely reject change because they hate the future. They reject change when it creates unnecessary friction in the present. Netflix learned that lesson the hard way, and instead of abandoning its long-term vision, it adjusted its approach. That decision required something surprisingly rare in business: humility. Many organizations confuse persistence with stubbornness. Netflix didn't. It admitted the rollout had failed, corrected course, but it refused to abandon the future it believed was coming. That combination is extraordinarily difficult. Changing your strategy every time people criticize you leads to confusion. Ignoring every criticism leads to arrogance. Great leadership requires knowing the difference. Netflix didn't survive because every decision was perfect. It survived because it separated temporary mistakes from long-term conviction. That distinction would soon become one of its greatest competitive advantages, because an even bigger threat was quietly approaching. Not from another streaming company, but from the very studios that supplied Netflix with the movies and television shows people came to watch. And that threat would force Netflix to make an even bolder decision. By 2012, Netflix had crossed a dangerous bridge. The company had proven that streaming could work, but it had uncovered a much deeper problem, one that threatened the entire business. Netflix had built a spectacular storefront. It didn't own enough of what it was selling. Nearly everything viewers loved belonged to someone else. Hollywood studios, television networks, media companies, every movie, every television series, every licensing agreement could eventually disappear. And slowly, they did. The studios had begun asking a question that should have terrified Netflix. If streaming is the future, why are we helping someone else own it? One by one, media companies realized they possessed something far more valuable than DVDs or television schedules. They owned the stories, the intellectual property, the characters, the worlds people returned to again and again. Netflix suddenly faced a future where its greatest asset, its enormous audience, could become worthless if the content kept leaving. This wasn't just a licensing problem. It was a control problem. And that is one of the oldest lessons in business. If the foundation of your company depends entirely on someone else's decisions, then your future isn't really yours. Netflix had escaped one trap, only to discover another. The easy response would have been to negotiate harder, sign larger licensing deals, spend more money renting entertainment from others. Many companies would have done exactly that. Netflix chose a far more expensive path. Instead of renting stories, it decided to create them. In 2013, the company made one of the boldest investments in entertainment history. Not because producing original content was cheaper. It wasn't. Not because success was guaranteed. It certainly wasn't. Original programming required billions of dollars, creative risk, global production, and the uncomfortable possibility that audiences might simply reject what Netflix created. The first major test came with House of Cards. It wasn't merely another television show. It was a declaration. Netflix no longer wanted to be just a distributor. It wanted to become a studio, a storyteller, an owner. The significance of that decision went far beyond Hollywood. Netflix had quietly changed the rules of its own business. Instead of depending on borrowed value, it began building assets that competitors couldn't simply take back. This is the hidden pattern behind many enduring companies. Amazon built infrastructure. Apple built ecosystems. Nvidia built platforms. Netflix built ownership. Not ownership of physical products. Ownership of attention. Ownership of stories. Ownership of relationships with millions of viewers. Most people remember Netflix because of streaming. History may ultimately remember it for something far more important. It understood that real competitive advantage isn't created by selling access. It's created by owning what everyone else eventually needs. And behind every one of those decisions lay a psychological truth that reaches far beyond business. The greatest obstacle to tomorrow is often yesterday's success. There is a temptation that eventually visits every successful company. It whispers the same promise. Protect what already works. The first sounds like wisdom. After all, why risk a profitable business? Why replace a successful product? Why challenge loyal customers? Why invest billions in an uncertain future? History has an uncomfortable answer. Because the market never promises that today's success will still matter tomorrow. That is why so many great companies disappear without ever seeing the real danger. They don't fail because they stop working. They fail because they stop changing. Netflix understood something that is surprisingly rare in business. Every successful model has an expiration date. The difficult part is that no one tells you when that date arrives. By the time it becomes obvious, it's usually too late. Instead of waiting for certainty,
Netflix chose préparation.
instead of defending the past, it invested in the future. Instead of asking, how do we protect our DVD business? It asked, what business will matter when DVDs no longer do? That single shift in thinking changed the company's future. The transition was not smooth. The Quickster decision damaged trust. Licensing costs exploded. Original content demanded enormous capital. Competition intensified as companies such as Disney, Warner Brothers, NBC Universal, and others launched their own streaming platforms. There was no guarantee that Netflix would emerge stronger. Yet the company kept moving toward the future it believed was coming. Not because every decision was correct, but because its direction remained consistent. That may be the most valuable lesson hidden inside this story. Great companies are not defined by flawless execution. They are defined by the courage to adapt before adaptation becomes unavoidable. That principle extends far beyond Netflix. Apple disrupted the iPod with the iPhone before someone else could. Amazon sacrificed years of profits to build infrastructure competitors struggled to match. NVIDIA invested in an ecosystem long before artificial intelligence became a global race. Different industries, different decades, the same invisible pattern. The companies that shape the future rarely wait for permission. They prepare while everyone else is still protecting the present. And perhaps that's the real reason Netflix became one of the defining companies of the streaming era. It wasn't simply because it embraced technology. It embraced discomfort. It accepted that temporary uncertainty was the price of long-term relevance. Most people think empires collapse because competitors become stronger. History suggests something else. They collapse when leaders mistake today's success for tomorrow's security. The future rarely belongs to the biggest company. It rarely belongs to the oldest company. And it doesn't always belong to the smartest company. More often than not, it belongs to the company willing to question its own success before the world forces it to. Because every empire has a turning point. Every turning point hides a principle. And every principle has the power to build or break an empire. This is Billionaire Realm.